We demystify what goes on behind the therapy room door. Join us on this voyage of discovery and co-creative conversations. This is the Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast, with Bob Cooke and Jacci Jones.
Welcome back to the next episode of the Therapy Show Behind Closed Doors with myself, Jacci Jones, and the wonderful Mr. Bob Cooke, as always. And we're up to episode 183, Bob.
183, and I've got a cold for 183.
Oh, that's not good.
I've got
He's being a hero turning up, but if he's got the sniffles, you'll have to excuse him. But it's winter, it's cold, it's coming up to Christmas. What can we do?
Yeah, and a cold's not a good enough reason to end therapy.
It's not. It's not.
That's what I'm talking about, aren't we? Endings.
So what we're talking about in this one is bad endings in the therapy room. So not just endings, but bad endings.
Yeah, bad endings where there's been a not effective outcome.
Yeah.
Well, I can think of many. I mean, we can talk about bad endings in the sense that there's been a rupture. Have you got any where there's been a bad ending yourself?
Yes. In the early days, I had one that, well, I think I had two. One was somebody that asked for her husband to come into one of the sessions, and I didn't think it was appropriate, so I said no.
What did they say? They wanted her what to come into the session?
They wanted a husband to come in to
husband. And
what she'd told me prior to that led me to think that it was him that had coerced her to him coming into one of her sessions. So I said that I didn't think that that was a good idea, and she just didn't come back. I contacted her and she said she thought it was inappropriate that she couldn't bring whoever she wanted to the sessions. Yeah, so that was an abrupt ending. And another one was where somebody just disappeared on me, and I never found out why they disappeared or anything. And I really struggled with that because there was no closure. There was no ending for me. I didn't know whether they were okay. I didn't know anything. And I did really struggle with that.
I mean, interestingly enough, what may sound like a bad ending isn't always a bad ending.
No, but it feels like it. If it's an abrupt one and there's no communication at all, yeah.
I was thinking of protection, really.
Okay.
So you might make decisions which is protective of the client, even though they might leave.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first
I
one
would just say about bad
certainly
ending.
Wasn't impressed with me at all. She didn't.
Yeah. Well, in that case, you have your boundaries, your own structures, and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, the other thing about bad endings is I was thinking about, if you think of the theory that people will attempt to enact out their script, healthy or not healthy, in the psychotherapy process, they may engineer it in such a way where ending is almost inevitable.
Yes. Yeah.
That's something to look out for, I think.
And I think I learned that as time went on, that sometimes there's nothing that you can do to change the outcome, if that makes sense. They are replaying the script, and whether that's to do with attachment or abandonment or whatever, but yeah, sometimes we're just a pawn in the script.
Well, yeah, I often think that way, and therefore, it's even worse if we reinforce that script.
Yeah,
I think, because we may then be part of a situation where hope is taken away from them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I mean. It depends what we call bad endings in a way. I can think of times where, just like you really, where I've made decisions that the other person's not agreed with, and they may or may not come back. I've also made mistakes where the person's decided not to come back. And in a way, though we can see them as bad endings, is if we learn from those processes, that's how we can grow.
Yeah. And it's inevitable, really, in a career that you are going to upset some people, and some people are going to not turn up for sessions.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm. And in couples therapy, of course, I always ask them, each of the couples, is it this about helping you separate
Yeah.
or working therapeutically to see what happens, basically? And sometimes, you know, people come to the conclusion that therapy isn't going to help in the end, so they do separate. Would we call that a bad ending? I don't know. But as long as it's spelt out from the beginning.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is
I
the job
must
of a
admit, I
therapist.
always do that, that therapy isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about ending the relationship appropriately.
Mm.
And yeah,
And also, Eric, you know, it's a word, interesting word, bad. I mean, Eric Byrne would talk about positive um, outcome with therapy is when the contract's been achieved,
yes, yeah,
isn't they? So sometimes people don't achieve their contract. Does that mean it's not been effective psychotherapy? I'm not so sure, because
yeah,
people can learn things on the way. And another thing, people can leave therapy and you might think it's not been a good outcome, but they might come back, 2 months later, 3 months later, a year later, and say, I've been thinking about this and I decided to have another go, or thinking about it and realizing that when they decided to leave therapy, in their opinion, it was for the best because they felt overwhelmed, but they've decided to come back again.
yeah,
So when people suddenly leave, though it may feel not effective or bad, if we want to say, it doesn't mean it always is.
no. And I think for me, it was something that I needed to take to supervision from the impact it had on me. Do you know what I mean? Which it did kind of connect into my script of not being good enough, or I got it wrong, and all those sort of things. And I think not being able to bring it to a conclusion, I struggled with that. So that was something that I definitely needed to take to supervision, because I can't always have the endings that I want. It doesn't work that way.
No, most things are grist to the mill, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
The occasional thing might happen. I can remember something in my very early days where a client left because they felt I'd been disloyal to their, put another way, highly critical of their parents, for example.
Yeah.
And that's very, very common.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
or I never think of a time where someone left because they thought I'd sided with their parents in a piece of parent interview. So there are times which, yeah, and I learned from them, even though I felt bad at the time.
Yeah. I think I've actually got something written in my contract now that, not that they're going to stick to it if they're going to go anyway, that they don't end therapy abruptly, and, we bring it to a conclusion together, sort of thing.
Yeah, and sometimes that's outside our control.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But it's something that I feel like I need to discuss with them, that, do you know what I mean? Up front, about not disappearing on me. If you want to end, that's absolutely fine, but we end it in the session appropriately, and kind of say why that is.
Yeah, I mean that's nice to put in there, and I just think if people want to go for whatever reasons, they will. Now,
Yeah,
will they
100%
stay and
agree.
talk to you through that? Well, that's nice in terms of your closure, I suppose. But in terms of their script, it might be their script to run away, to withdraw, whatever you like.
Yeah. I
Mm.
think to just have a conversation about it lets them know that, yeah, it's a possibility that they might do that. It might be overwhelming and they might want to go.
I mean, a bigger question is that even though we may feel bad for whatever reasons, or we may make a conclusion that as the person's left, that it's bad in some ways. Is it ever really? Is there ever such a thing as a bad ending in psychotherapy?
Good question. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know really, because if you see therapy as helping the person on their journey, Burns thought about achieving a contract. I'm not sure I see it about achieving a contract, but often just by coming to therapy for the first time,
Yeah.
it's such a big thing for a person. Maybe they've been internally depressed, incapacitated, and not being able to get out of bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
They decide they've got enough motivation to actually have therapy, so they spend many days and weeks, and eventually manage to get out of bed or manage to get the energy to go pick up the phone and come to therapy to you. And maybe that in itself, regardless of what happens in therapy, is a victory in a way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose, it's our interpretation of a bad ending, or,
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
yeah, it's absolutely, because and you touched on it earlier on about some clients, stop and then come back later on. I can't count the amount of clients that have finished I wouldn't say a bad ending, but have chosen to end, and then within a month or 2 months they're phoning up saying, oh, this has happened, can I come back again? And they do that a lot. Rather than continuing, they will come, when there's a life event or something happens, for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then go and then come back again.
So it seems to me for you, that I've got this right, that if you haven't got a chance to complete the process or say goodbye, then you feel bad.
Yeah, I feel that we
That
haven't
doesn't mean
ended it
it is, does it?
appropriately. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean always it is,
No, no,
even
no.
though you feel it.
Yes, yeah, 100%. I am aware of that. Yeah. And I've got better with it now. Do you know what I mean? That I suppose, I don't know whether it's a duty of care, or I feel responsible, or something like that, or
Okay.
that's how it used to feel. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? That it needed to end appropriately, otherwise I hadn't done my job properly. Whereas now I appreciate and understand that often I don't get a choice in it. It's not my choice, it's theirs, and they may be working through their script.
Mm. Yes, I definitely think that. And another thing, I think positive, healthy endings needs to be, if we have an ideal world,
Yes,
a
yeah,
time where they plan their endings with you,
yeah,
4 sessions, 2 sessions, 1 section. You do a review and celebrate what they've changed.
yeah,
That perhaps we could say is a healthy ending, or an ending therapists would wish for.
yeah,
When that actually happens is another story. I mean, sometimes people say, or come in and say, really, I'd just like to end next week.
yes, yeah,
Now, as a therapist, ideally, like I said, I think we should have more time for that. And sometimes, if you ask them before they even came into therapy, how do you normally end relationships, or how are you with endings? 10 to 1, they'll say not very good.
that's exactly what was running through my mind when you were saying it. It's something that is probably alien to an awful lot of people, that endings are abrupt in most relationships. Yeah,
And nowadays, in the century we live in, often by text,
yes, yeah,
which
and a
is
door slamming on the way out or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So sometimes people feel it's the only way they can leave, to have
yes,
one session.
yeah,
I've also lost count of times, by the way, when people have come back.
yeah,
So they've withdrawn, they've left, I've not heard about them, and then suddenly they arrive back and say, well, it was all too much for me, and I felt overwhelmed. I had to leave to realize I needed to come back.
yeah, 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 and it's part of their process. Absolutely.
Mm. I think therapists like to, well, not just talk about you, Jackie. I think a lot of therapists, they like to have it sort of where there's a sort of healthy ending, and they see it where they can complete
Yeah.
4 or 5 sessions to review it and everything. I do think that's the ideal ending. I don't know how many times I've actually ever had that though.
Yeah. Looking back, I'm not sure how many I've actually
I have
had.
had some like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes people just come in and say they'd like to end the next session, and I say, well, I'd like to have 2 sessions. Or very rarely ever had it where they've, oh, I have had it. I don't know how common where they come in and say, I want to leave this session.
Yeah.
I try and make them stay at least one more session where we can reflect and review and celebrate what they've actually achieved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just going.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
Because that is an important thing to reflect back on where they were and where they are now for them as much as anything. Yeah. But it is, I think the more we're having this conversation, the more unusual it is to have an appropriate ending.
I think it is. I think
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
I think people find it very hard to have 3 weeks to say goodbye.
Yeah.
They find it hard to do that. So they like to leave within, well, often the session they come in at, or maybe perhaps no more than one.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm thinking. Do you know what I mean? That they come in and say, I've made the decision that I want to leave. They don't want to come back again. They've said it. It was a big enough decision for them to say it.
What about when the therapist leaves? So the therapist is ill, or the therapist
Yeah.
retires, or the therapist has a crisis in their life. XX. I was thinking I'm retiring in a couple of years. I retired from training. I retired clinically 4 years ago. I told all my clients, and we had 3 months.
Yeah. If it's a planned thing, then
Not all of them stayed 3 months, by the way.
yeah.
It was too much of them for lots of different reasons. But it's interesting when the therapist leaves.
Yes.
Is it a bad ending? I found mostly that clients, when I ended, may have found it hard because it was enforced on them.
Yes.
Is
Yeah.
that bad ending? I don't know. I think endings and change are very difficult for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I recently had to end seeing clients face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was difficult, but we did it over a period. We knew it was coming, so we did it over a period. And I also gave them the option of forwarding them on to somebody else. Do you know what I mean? If that was what they wanted to, because I do feel like I had a duty of care.
I had something the other day when it's mental health assessment, and they said, I need to process the fact my therapist has ended therapy with me because they're retiring. And I said, oh, right, okay. And it feels like they've dumped me.
Yeah.
And I said, well, people do retire, or forget I actually said that. But she said, well, we were together 4 years and I didn't get enough notice.
Wow.
I need to have a therapist to process all that lot. So for her, we might say that's an ending which was challenging for her,
Yeah.
forced on her. Or
Yeah.
she felt it was forced on her. I don't, the therapist gave a month's notice to all the clients. For some therapists, clients, that would be enough. For other clients, they might find that very challenging in terms of they haven't finished their therapy, or they're middle of the therapy, or whatever it is. And for them, 4 weeks is far too short.
But then again, that can be used as a therapeutic process for the client on, how to end a relationship appropriately. Yeah. I know one particular one found it really difficult, And she still contacts me now, and she sends me gifts and cards every so often, and she refers to me as a therapy mum. And it's nice, but there was something, I think, that I felt uncomfortable with the relationship.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
My wife recently did a workshop at our conference, and it was on symbiosis,
Mm.
or in the American version, codependency.
Yeah.
And she talked about healthy symbiosis and unhealthy symbiosis. And sometimes, the therapist will encourage what is called idealized transference
Yes. Yeah.
for the work to be done. And sometimes clients can get into a relationship with their therapist, which is often reenactment of their history, of course, and end up in a symbiosis, which ending from is very, very difficult for them.
Yeah.
Because that's what they should have done earlier on in their history. So it's all about that. So endings are often very challenging for people.
Yeah. It is something that, if it can be worked through in therapy, even when you're first starting, is to discuss endings. Do you know what I mean? And like you said earlier on, how do you end relationships? I wasn't very good at ending relationships. Ending anything, really, whether it was relationships or not. I can remember, I used to do a course, and before I'd finish one, I'd start another one, so that there was always an overlap, and things like that, because I didn't like endings. I've got better with them now. I've got better at managing them.
And then we've got people who've got personality disorders who may force endings.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was thinking of let's say, inverted commas, borderline,
Yeah.
who has a morbid fear of abandonment and is always hyper vigilant around anyone leaving them, or certainly a therapist leaving them, and often sets it up in such a way that they push away or attempt to push away the therapist so drastically that therapy might come to an abrupt end.
Yeah.
So I think the more disturbed a person is, endings aren't so straightforward.
Yeah. I think for a lot of us, really, when you think about it, endings they're not always pleasurable. An ending isn't something that often we look forward to happening, whether that's in a relationship or a career or anything, really.
And in a therapy relationship, of course, it's always going to end, because it's there's going to be a set amount of time.
Yes.
Has to be.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
you are right. I think endings and how people end is often reflective on how the challenges they've had in endings in their life.
Yeah. So there are ways that we can work on endings as part of the therapy process.
Oh, yeah. So here we are. Absolutely. So, for example, in the placements at my institute, they have 26 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a low cost placement. So they get the therapy for £15. But I always say at the beginning of the assessment, before I place them, that it's very, very important for you to remember there's only 26 sessions.
Yeah. Which sounds a lot to a lot of people when you say 26 sessions. Yeah.
Yes, but becomes a very, very, very short time as they get nearer the 26th session.
Yes.
And I'm always saying to the therapists, the new therapists, remember to tell them repeatedly, as they near the 26th session, do not wait to the 25th session to remind them, or the 24th session to remind them, or the 23rd session to remind them, just because you think they've been told that.
Yeah, I can remember when I was, training and working at the low-cost client, I did like a 10-week countdown. Do you know what I mean? And I reminded them every session for the last 10 weeks, we've got 9 weeks left now. We've got 8 weeks left now. And even having done that, when it came to it, I think he was pushing to see whether he could have any extra ones tagged onto the end or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get people with dissociative identity disorder, I'll say the more disturbed people, and they don't remember what you say anyway, or they may dissociate from what you say. But certainly, I always recommend to the therapist to do a review session earlier than later, like the 22nd or the 23rd session, because most clients will not be ready to leave, even though they've heard it. So they hear it, but they only hear it in their child ego state.
Yes.
They don't hear it in their adult ego state.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, it goes from like, I don't remember when I had the assessment. I was told it was 26 weeks. Oh, but you were. Bob always says that. Well, I don't remember that. How's that happened? And it's because when they come do the mental health assessment, they're often in their child ego state rather than adult ego state. So it becomes part of a contaminated system. So I'm always saying to therapists, make sure you do the review on the 23rd session or even the 22nd session. And then you've got 2 sessions at least to do the review and even 2 sessions to wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because most people have huge
Planning
chances
for
around that.
termination is part of the process. And like you say, doing a countdown to them or reminding them or whatever it is, that's one way of looking at it. Another way is having open communications about endings. And like you said, asking them, how do you end relationships?
Good question.
And what does it mean if a relationship ends? Is it always a bad ending when you've ended relationships, or have you ever ended a relationship on
Wonderful
a positive
discussion
note?
to have. And out of that often comes the conversation about their history, where they were so fearful of endings, they attempt to force the other person to end before they have to end.
Yeah. And I
So
suppose as well, a lot of people, I might be making assumptions here, assume or make the connection with endings and conflict.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There has to be a conflict for it to end. So we're trying to allow them to have an ending without a conflict, which might not be something that they've ever experienced before.
Absolutely. And sometimes a therapist has to even say, well, I'm not about the placements here for 26 weeks. I'm talking private psychotherapy. Might have to say, look, we work through most of what we work through, so we need to find a way to end.
Yeah.
That's
And
it.
endings, not necessarily permanent endings. For some clients, I've had, if I have a 2-week holiday in the summer, we need to work up to that. Do you know what I mean? That they're okay for that 2 weeks that they're not going to see me, which sounds quite a lot, but for some people there is a sense of abandonment if I took a holiday.
Oh, yeah, the more disturbed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I met somebody the other day, and I saw her 28 years ago.
Wow.
Bumped into her. I did I did remember her because she was with me 3 or 4 years. We were talking about the therapy, and she said, oh, how I see that it was a period of my life. But probably the most important period of my life. So that was very satisfying in a way. And I think many clients I've met over the years have often said the same thing. They've seen it as a period of their life with beginning, middle, and end.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which is healthy.
Mm.
Yeah. So endings aren't always bad.
No, and I think the question, as I said at the beginning, is really what does bad mean anyway?
Yeah.
It might be different for the therapist to the client and the client to the therapist.
Yeah.
But endings of a part of, when we're born, we eventually die.
Yes.
When we come to therapy, eventually it ends.
Yes.
The sun goes up, the moon comes down. I mean, it's like part of life.
Yes, it is. So maybe having discussions around endings as part of the therapy is a healthy way to introduce
Definitely.
the topic. Yeah.
And we train therapists to do that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I do, not necessarily maybe endings, but reconciliations and how that was modeled to them when they were growing up.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? If your mum and dad argued, how did they make up? What was that like for you? And an awful lot of people never see the make up. They see the argument, but they don't know how to make up. Yeah.
So it's all in the same ballpark. But I agree with you. I think therapists need to bring endings in sooner than later.
Yeah. Bring endings in before the ending. That's what we need to do.
Couldn't agree more. So
what a wonderful conversation to have, Bob, and something for us all to be mindful of, that, it is, like you say, it's a natural part of life, and therapy will end at some point for whatever reason.
Yeah, and if we can manage it and it's reviewed, then we
Yes.
can allow ourselves a healthy ending for once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So until next time, Bob, where we'll be talking about how to cope over the festive season.
Oh my gosh.
It's a big deal for a lot of people.
For me, yeah, certainly is. Certainly is. Inside and outside therapy.
Inside and outs, yes, exactly. So until next time, Bob, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.